Hello, I'm Michael Hainsworth. Canada's housing affordability crisis threatens to get worse in the era of Trump-driven uncertainty. The threat of inflation risks raising the cost of borrowing at a time when shelter is already an outsized percentage of the cost of living. Meet Paul Beaudry. He is a professor at the Vancouver School of Economics. And this is Jeremy Kronick, VP of Economic Analysis and Strategy at the C.D. Howe Institute. The pair have authored a report titled Making Housing More Affordable in Canada: The Need for More Large Cities. They argue that improving affordability requires both an increase in supply in existing cities and policies that foster the emergence of larger secondary cities. They join us now. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.
Paul, as bad as the situation is, your research points out that there's a bit of a disconnect between perception and reality of Canada's investment in housing supply.
Yeah, so Canada's been kind of investing quite a bit in housing. You know, when there's this aspect of comparing to other countries, we've been kind of growing very fast. There's an aspect of building a lot. Even if we're looking at kind of the amount of housing per capita, it's actually been growing. Just this kind of very recent surge in population in the kind of 2022 and 2023 that you can kind of see this decrease. But if you look over 10, 15 years, we've been doing very, very fast building, but still getting this very kind of increase in housing prices. So supply by itself might not be the solution. We really have to figure out where we put all that supply.
Paul's exactly right. The only thing I might add to that is if you look at construction, labor, as a percentage of total workforce of the economy, it's actually grown from 5%, I believe, at the turn of the century to 8% now. So we've got more people working in construction than we have over the last 50 years. And to Paul's point, despite that fact, we still haven't seen the kinds of improvements in affordability we'd expect. Now, it's not to say that there's not more we can do on the supply side. For sure there is. But it's just to say that the problem from that perspective, if you only look at it through that lens, is not enough to tell the story.
So then, Jeremy, help me understand the supply and demand dynamics here. If we invest more per capita than many other countries, what's behind the acceleration in housing prices that we've seen? Is it simply a case of demand?
Yeah. So, I mean, yes, the answer is yes, that there's a big demand component to it. But what Paul and I were showing in this paper was, if you were to focus almost exclusively your supply on the big cities like Toronto, like Vancouver, like Montreal, and that, in the sort of Econ 101 language, reduces the prices or slows price growth. If there's a whole bunch of people in different cities who are looking to live in Toronto and Vancouver and Montreal, then those people are now going to see those lower prices and they're going to come to Toronto and Vancouver and Montreal, and that demand is going to bid prices back up and might even bid it up even further. And economically, that might be good. There's an agglomeration gain that can happen in the big cities for sure. But from an affordability perspective, if that's the goal, then you're not going to get that.
I see you included an interesting graph, Paul, on the City House Price Index by country. Toronto is second to Berlin in the Home Price Index as of 2024, but you broaden that out to the national level, revealing that Canada has the highest ranking, while Japan, Spain, Ireland, they're among the lowest. Are there lessons to be learned from cities like Tokyo, Madrid, Dublin, or are they just as mired as we are, but just not to the same degree?
Well, like we say in the paper, almost everywhere the price of housing has been going up. So this is not like a surprising thing. There's been a lot of aspects that kind of have pushed up the housing prices. Interest rates that had declined over kind of like a 20-year period pushed up housing prices in a lot of places. The surprising thing is not so much that's a very general aspect, but it's exactly trying to understand, why is Canada kind of the leader in this increase in housing prices, despite the fact that it's actually grown quite a bit of its housing supply. And that's really the kind of puzzle as we see it, and kind of understanding that in Canada, we, relative to our population, we have a few big cities and we don't have a lot of other options, especially when you compare to like countries like the US, where they have the very big cities, but they have a lot of other cities that are big and attractive, that have a diversity of amenities, a diversity of jobs that attract people. Why do people still come to kind of our big cities in Canada? Is because they're looking for that kind of combination of having kind of the possibility of good jobs, a diversity of jobs, kind of allowing a whole family to establish, but it's extremely costly. And the aspect is, to make that kind of more affordable, you have to have other options. We have to kind of help build other cities that are going to be attractive, that make that level up of having that kind of agglomeration, a set of jobs, a set of kind of diverse, good jobs that are kind of attractive to people. And then it will make not all the pressure on our big cities. Right now, it's as if we expand our big cities and everyone wants to come in because that's where like a lot of the opportunities for the future are there.
So then what makes a smaller city or a town more attractive outside of the fact that you don't have to mortgage your left leg to afford the home?
Yeah, so there's a few, we reference a few different cities in the paper that have been successful, Galway in Ireland and Bologna in Italy. And there's some common trends you see in those cities that have had success growing from kind of smaller cities into bigger cities over time. And so having a world-class university, a link between that world-class university and the private sector, so you've got investment dollars coming in, connectivity with the rest of the world because of that relationship, creating new industries again from that relationship between the private sector and universities. And then there's some that also happen through government support as well. But it's all with this kind of lens of creating a city that is quite attractive, that has amenities, that has infrastructure, that has education, and then and obviously needs to have businesses and jobs that come with it. But the labor is already there if you've got those world-class universities. And so there's a lot of success stories that we can point to as examples of cities that have grown from kind of a smaller status into ones that can compete with their larger cousins.
So, Paul, do we just have to build the University of Leg Cramp, Manitoba?
Well, again, I think we can build on cities that already have the university structure and different things. And so you don't want to really be thinking of kind of starting necessarily from the very small. It's kind of like these medium kind of smaller cities in Canada that could make it. What we need is not a whole bunch of these. We need kind of a few more, 3 or 4 cities that are kind of above 2 million that would give these extra options. And so you really want to move cities that might be like 500,000 or kind of, something like that, to moving them to 2 million, not starting from scratch. And there's lots of places in Canada that you can already build on that. And what's important to see is that dynamics really takes a coordination, because to make a city attractive and make it kind of that more into a big city, you really need both people to be there and jobs to be there. And that's the part where government plays a role. By itself, this is a part where, because of agglomeration externalities, leaving the market by itself does not necessarily give you the kind of right distribution of cities in a country. You might end up exactly like we have it. You have a few big cities that are very expensive, that a lot of the kind of gains that go to agglomeration all go into the land prices in those cities. And those are the people that take huge advantage. And that's the aspect that we see the tension when you look at a lot of young families and they're kind of wanting to start and think, oh yeah, the career in the big city would be good, but it's so costly. Can I move there? And that's the tension. But again, what we're saying is you build and they'll come in if we build, and so that city can grow, but it won't become cheaper. If you want it to be cheaper, they have to have outside options that make that as a different option and kind of competing. You have to have more competition between our cities to really make them affordable.
The goal here is not for every city to get a little bit and grow a little bit, right? There has to actually be a concerted effort to determine which cities are sort of best suited to do this, right? So, for example, London already has a world-class university, so that seems like a logical place to start. And then also you have, the city wants to do it, right? The people have to buy into growing and becoming these more competitive cities. But it's not a sort of regional development, spread the resources evenly across every town in the province. It's really picking out ones that seem to have the best attributes to grow and create this competitiveness with our bigger cities.
I wonder if we could have had this conversation earlier. Jeremy, you and I have already discussed addressing the shortfall of housing in major centers in previous conversations. We've talked about the reducing housing regulations to support more building. But this idea that we need to stop seeing cities like Toronto and Vancouver as the center of the universe is relatively new. What role did the pandemic and the reality of work from home play in this now new two-part solution?
Yeah, it's interesting you put it that way. I don't, Paul can correct me. I don't remember that we had a conversation. We thought of it in terms of what happened in the pandemic, but you're right that could act as a little bit of an impetus to start thinking about people's preferences if they could live in different places. But I think ultimately where Paul and I were coming from on this paper was just like, look at some of these statistics. Like, we actually are building a lot. We are investing a lot. We do have a lot of labor working in these sectors. We are trying to do a number of things to remove barriers. And again, there's more we can do. We're not arguing that. But yet we're still not successful. And we're not only not successful, but we're worse than really any country that we compare ourselves to. So there's got to be something else at play here, right? Some other theory that we can use. And so that's where, the idea came from. And then we modeled it, and then so we ended up, coming up with this kind of idea. But, so you can come at it at a bunch of different ways, but I think that's how we got to where we were.
And I'd go even a bit further, is you could have thought, like, when it started with COVID and kind of like more of the remote work, maybe this pressure would kind of be reduced on our big cities. People would kind of be able to move out and kind of work from far away and everything. And it's partly true, but not that far. It's like people still have to kind of come into jobs at kind of, a few times a week and everything. So that kind of allows maybe the bigger cities to expand a bit. But we really haven't really seen this kind of decrease in the general interest. There was obviously during COVID at the beginning, there was really this aspect of, outside cities were kind of growing and all this. But quite quickly, people started noticing, but you're kind of probably going to come back into work. There are some jobs that are really remote now, and see, people can do it at a distance. And that's actually something that probably helps right now. But we see it hasn't been enough to kind of reverse the trend. So despite the remote work, we still have to do something. Cities still play a role. People have to still go in them, and big cities still are a kind of an important element. We haven't, remote work hasn't kind of taken away the attraction of big cities.
Well, there's also that line that the housing industry uses, real estate agents type of thing, of driving till you qualify for a mortgage, pushing people further and further out of major urban centers like Toronto into the greater Toronto area. Suddenly Hamilton is now considered to be a connection for those who want to work in Toronto but not pay the price of Toronto. I wonder, would the proposed high-speed rail link between Toronto and Quebec City solve the drive until you qualify for a mortgage nature of house hunting in the big cities today? First
of all, the drive until you kind of, be able to pay the mortgage, to me, is just an extra cost. Okay. So when you kind of think about that, that's a different way. You're kind of paying in the time of commuting. So that's actually all part of the problem, instead of being kind of a part of the solution. In the big cities, if you can't afford right in downtown and you have to go 30 kilometers out and kind of commute by an hour and a half each way, that's very costly for people. So that's not the solution. It really is kind of creating another city that actually has people not too far out and that they're actually not commuting that much, but still have that variety of aspects. So it's exactly that part, that it's not just the idea that you want to spread of the current big cities and kind of expanding that, which in terms of price, like I say, might give you the impression it's a bit cheaper. But if you take that into all account, it's not really cheaper to live out there. It's just that you can kind of afford it because it kind of hits your down payment, but you're paying it a different way.
Even if you did go that route, right? And again, if we focus on Toronto proper and you start building more in Toronto proper to lower the price so that people don't have to do that, well, again, that person who's in Hamilton may then come to Toronto and bid the price right back up. So the theory actually holds whether we think of it as a commuter city or a standalone city. So again, the solution is we have to make these other cities more competitive to prevent people from wanting to move into Toronto, Vancouver, et cetera, if the goal is affordability. And I can't stress that part enough because it came up a lot in writing this paper. We're talking about affordability, right? You can make a case that GDP will be higher, right, if we just load everybody into Toronto because of the agglomeration gains, the big city and all that stuff. But there's a reason that we don't have only one big city and everybody living in it, right? There are other things, other considerations. Paul mentioned the commuting costs, congestion costs, et cetera, that matter to people. And affordability is one of those things, and the ability to spend your money elsewhere. And so what we're saying is, if you look at it from the perspective of affordability, if that is the goal, to have extra affordability in these cities, then we need to make other cities more competitive so people don't just want to leave the second that prices lower in the big cities.
What would your advice be to a small town mayor trying to attract people out of the big city so their city becomes a big city?
Why would you help a particular city? It helps people for affordability elsewhere. That's the aspect. It's the spreading out. There's a gain to others. If was given the example, if London, Ontario becomes bigger and more attractive, that takes pressure out on Toronto and kind of reduces those prices in Toronto, helping a lot of things in Toronto. So you'd actually want to help London. You don't want to say, London, just do it yourself. That's fine. It should kind of work. They kind of need help to make that happen. It's kind of an aspect. It's a social kind of contract to make it happen for more affordable across the board. And again, very important not to spread this thing out thin. We have to figure out there's a few cities in which you really help and make them bigger.
The key to this, to making this work from a policy perspective, to getting the support of the more senior levels of government, is to convince people in the bigger cities that this is actually good for them as well, right? That this is going to improve their chances to buy in Toronto if they're living in Toronto and they're renting right now. And that's the key to that success, right? Is getting people to believe in it outside of just the smaller cities. And again, you need to convince those smaller cities. So that's the first part. On sort of what I would add to it is the key here, I think, is to be forward looking, right? You know, if you think about subway systems in Boston and New York when they were built, you know, at the turn of the 20th century, it was forward. They had a forward looking vision for where the city was going. And so we need to do the same thing. So when we build that infrastructure, let's not build for where Kingston or London, Ontario is today, build for where it's going to be down the line, right? So be forward looking. And then from the what the municipalities can do is stuff around business growth, right? About attracting businesses there, either through, indirect ways of of supporting lenders, loan guarantees, or direct financing. There are tools at the municipal toolbox as well that they can use to try and bring businesses to their smaller cities with the promise of that growth that's coming.
So as I mentioned at the top of the conversation, Donald Trump, certainly a wild card for a lot of aspects of economics broadly, everywhere around the world, not just here in Canada. How do you see the housing market playing out in the near term as we deal with the tariff threats, we deal with the pullback in spending by corporations who are concerned about what the future may hold and what the knock-on effects are for the housing market?
Well, pretty clear. Right now, we're in a world of incredible uncertainty, and that's going to kind of, create a lot of people to kind of put off any big decision, and housing is one of those big decisions. So it's unlikely that, this type of uncertainty won't feed back into the housing market, the slowing. We were seeing some picking up, as interest rates were coming down, we're seeing the picking up in that housing market. But this is certainly a kind of cold shower as you kind of have this uncertainty. Until we know what happens, how we're going to adjust, how the Americans, what tariffs are going to be in place, we might be, learning quite a bit over the next few weeks, the new aspects of the kind of whole kind of package of tariffs that the Americans want to put. Will we be a big part of that? Will we be a small part of that? Until that kind of clears up, I see the housing market having trouble. And if we do have the tariffs, then it's even further. Then it's the uncertainty might reduce, but that's a real demand aspect and really hits a lot of people in Canada. And again, that makes things more difficult, and people will be putting off kind of purchases like housing. And the Bank of Canada has kind of indicated they can help to a certain degree, but not too much through this whole aspect. So you can't think that interest rates are just going to plummet down and somehow make that housing kind of come back. So yes, in the short term, I think everything about this Trump administration, the uncertainty, is certainly a kind of cold shower on the current housing market.
That's exactly right. I mean, uncertainty is bad for businesses. It's bad for households. And then the effect on both is, kind of feeds. It's like a feedback loop between the two over and over and over again. And then even when that certainty comes, it may not be great for us. We may end up with that kind of dreaded stagflation, in which case the central bank can only do so much. Having said that, there is a number, you can already see a number of policy ideas that maybe were not front and center before, but are becoming front and center that are meant to try and offset all the bad things that are going to come from the tariffs. So internal trade barriers, freer mobility of labor across provinces, and all of that could be good, for the notion of living in different places. There's also going to be a need for government fiscal. I mean, this is, when the central bank says there's a limit to how much they can do, part of what they're saying is, hey, fiscal authorities, we're going to need you. And so this is where, again, the stuff that we talk about for bigger cities, could be done around development charges, better building, smarter building. I mean, there's all these opportunities to take this crisis and do some good things for the economy and for the housing market that actually might support our ideas. But how much the sort of demand side weighs on all of it, that's obviously a big, big challenge.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and insight today.
Thanks, Michael.
It was a pleasure.
Paul Beaudry is a professor at the Vancouver School of Economics, and Jeremy Kronick is the VP of Economic Analysis and Strategy at the C.D. Howe Institute. Read their report, Making Housing More Affordable in Canada, The Need for More Large Cities, at cdhowe.org. I'm Michael Hainsworth. Thank you for joining us.
You've been listening to the C.D. Howe Institute podcast with Michael Hainsworth. Subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify. The C.D. Howe Institute is an independent, not-for-profit research institute whose mission is to raise living standards by fostering economically sound public policies. The Institute is widely considered to be Canada's most influential think tank and a trusted source of essential policy intelligence, distinguished by nonpartisan, evidence-based research and subject to definitive expert review. Visit cdhowe.org and follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Thank you.